And John, you can begin whenever you are ready, sir.
So my final presentation and paper, I plan to write about the media's bias, the way it's kind of like affecting our society today in our world. But also I want to cover the whole process kind of advertising and making the political campaign ads that we analyzed this semester. So what is a bias basically? A bias is someone pushing their own beliefs or their own opinions onto you. And we saw this a lot in the 2012 political campaign ads. And so it's really just other people trying to influence you and your beliefs. Bias are found pretty much everywhere in our world today. They're in every advertisement we see, they're in every campaign ad we see, they're in every news source we see. We're surrounded by them, and there's not really much we can do about them. So how do we interpret them? Pretty much everyone interprets bias in their own way. There's no set standard or set way to interpret a bias. It's just kind of how you either flat out reject someone's bias or someone's opinion, or you can accept it and just kind of take it in and kind of mold your own beliefs to it. So bias are bad because they don't always tell you the whole truth. Generally the news will skew their opinions on you, and so you don't get the full story, the full truth. And so every news source has their own bias, and we see this a lot in, with CNN, Fox News. There's also the advertisements that have them, and pretty much everywhere. Every advertisement you see for consumer products and goods is also have them. And there's nothing we can really do about them. They're here to stay, and they're in our lives forever. We can't ignore them. We can't change them. We just have to learn to view things fully and wrap ourselves around it and try to learn from the bias. For example, Fox News has a Republican bias and CNN has a liberal bias. So every news source has a bias to some extent, whether it's political or not. So this 2012 election was a great example of all the bias. Every single campaign advertisement we saw this year had some form of a bias, whether it be, for example, the CNN had, the liberal bias. But then every campaign ad we saw a lot of the candidates going back and forth, bickering and bantering, fighting each other, showing their bias off towards what they believed they thought was right and what wasn't right to the other person. So we saw this pretty much this big fight going on all this semester, and bias being thrown around. And so it created a lot of this. The campaign ads was one news source would report on one thing, another news source would report on another thing, and the third news source would report on something completely different. So it's really hard to get the full story, what the truth might be from all these different news sources because of their bias skewing our perceptions on what we're seeing. And so bias are generally pretty bad, and it's hard to learn the truth from it. So we also learned about the advertising process and when we created our own political campaign ads. And we learned through this process that it's a huge process that we really can't we didn't really learn the whole process to it this semester. And as you'll see that generally it's this big process, and we just touched upon it a little bit when we were creating our own political campaign ads and forming our own bias in them. So really it's a long and daunting task, and it takes a lot of effort to put into a campaign. And so bias are really skewing our perceptions of our daily lives because they're telling us how to live our lives, what we should believe in, what we should buy. And so it's telling us, it's creating this new norm in our life. And we learned about this in our articles, is that our society is changing and we're having to adapt to it, and they're kind of telling us how to live our lives, telling us what cars we should buy, what food we should eat, what the perfect person looks like. So it's creating this new norm. And we saw this a lot in comparing advertisements from the early 50s to now. It's how much more bias there is in our campaign ads and just advertisements in general today than what they were in the 50s. And so it's just kind of changing everything today. And overall this semester, I thought coming in I had pretty strong political beliefs and I knew what I was talking about, but really I had no idea to an extent. So this semester I've really been able to become what I like to call a well-informed citizen. And so I think it's really important that we're all well-informed citizens, because if we're not, then we can't make our own good decisions, and we don't know what we're talking about when it comes down to voting in the political systems. So it's important that we all are well-informed citizens and that we can go out and vote in these elections. And I feel like if you didn't vote this year, then you made a mistake, because this was one of the most important elections, I think, that will ever happen in our lifetime. So I would encourage everyone that didn't vote this time to make sure you vote next time, and just to make sure you keep being well-informed citizens.
Okay, very nice. All right, open it up. Any questions for John, folks? So John, is it possible someone can be informed and also biased?
Definitely, because you could be informed, like, you can learn a lot about a topic, but you don't necessarily have the whole topic, like, you don't know everything about it. So you can be informed about certain topics to an extent, but you can still be only informed with some certain bias. Because if you only listen to one news source, then you don't really have the whole truth.
Okay. So then one way to get outside the bias is to look at different sources?
Yeah, I would definitely say analyze as many sources as you can. Try to, like, both sides. Like, if you're looking at a political issue, make sure you look at both Fox News and CNN and kind of compare them and stuff.
Mhm.
So.
Sure. Any other questions for John? I noticed you use a lot of comics for your images. Why was the choice with using those?
I don't know, 'cause I feel like comics really do a good job of showing, like, bias and, like, making kind of a joke out of it and trying to, like, I don't know, there weren't, like, a lot of pictures I could find with just, like, bias in the media, like, it's hard to find it, and so, like, comics worked a lot well, and they kind of showed good examples of how, like, big it is, and just how it's everywhere, kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, great. They offer political comments.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Sounds good. Any other questions for John, folks? All right. Thank you, John. One little applause.